Hello, and welcome to Night 9 of Bedtime Stories. We're going to be reading Chapter 9 of The King's Messenger. This is my dog Allison. She's turning her back to the camera. Okay, here you go. You can get down. There you go. Let's go to Chapter 9. Chapter 9. The King's Ambassador. First a reading from The Two Gentlemen of Verona by Shakespeare. I do entreat your patience to hear me speak the message I am sent on. From Shakespeare, Two Gentlemen of Verona. Going on to Chapter 9. Smuggins shifted his leg so that his weight fell more upon his cane. The movement relieved a little bit of the ache. The wound he had received from the enemy's servant was healing, but it had a long way to go. Out of the corner of his eye, Smuggins saw Misha glance his way with concern. She had told him the night before that she wasn't sure she was ready for this next mission, but Smuggins wouldn't have missed it for the world. He was going to be the King's ambassador. Smuggins wasn't quite sure why it was so important to him to be ready for this task the king had called them together about. He had been the king's messenger for many years, always serving him, but somehow this was different. As he thought about it, Smuggins wondered if he had always defined his role as a messenger from his own perspective rather than from the king's. It was a great honor in the land to be a messenger for the king, and even before he was ever called upon to go, Smuggins had recognized the honor that was his. But now that he thought about being the king's ambassador, he felt that he had to rethink the role. If he was going to be the mouthpiece of the king, he could not imbue his actions or words with anything but the king's express wishes. He would have to do the king's bidding, no more, no less. The king now by victory as well as right, was the ruler, and he, Smuggins, was subject to his ruler, taking the message the king would command. He felt like a new being, having come through the furnace of war, now at its conclusion, as if he had been forged into something different. The king stood from his throne on the dais at the front of the courtroom. His voice sounded new, deeper, and more authoritative. Messengers, step forth! As one, the messenger stepped forward. Smuggins leaned on his cane. At your service, your majesty, they said together. Today I called upon you for a great task. You have long served me as my messengers with good will and obedience. Through the war you have shown yourselves my loyal servants, honoring me at every turn. I have watched you grow from message carriers into the people I trust for what is to come. Today you will become my ambassadors. The king's voice broke a little on that final word. Smuggins, standing there before him, suddenly remembered that the king's enemy had once been his ambassador, his great friend. In the silence as the king regained his composure, the responsibility Smuggins felt on his shoulder grew weightier. As my ambassadors, you will have a single message to carry, the king paused again. Each messenger before him drew up a little straighter. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They knew the responsibility before them. They were even fairly certain as to the places the king would send them, but they had not yet heard just what message he wanted them to take. The king surveyed the line of messengers, from Iniggins the oldest down to Misha the youngest. He took a deep breath. You are the example of what it means to be my subjects. You and I have no conflict or secrets between us. You are mine through and through, and I want all in my land to be mine. I want for those who are far from me to be reconciled and return, and for those who pay me service with their words to live lives of joy with me. I want my kingdom to be a place where no one need tell his neighbor, trust the king, for all will know me and trust me. I give you this task then. Be my messengers of reconciliation. Bring them back to me. Smuggins took a deep breath. He understood the king's intent completely. No more would there be people in the land who could live in ignorance of the king's wishes and desires. No more would be those who had not heard his messages. And for a second thought, and a second thought followed quickly upon that understanding. No more would messengers be unique in the land. Everything would change. The king spoke again. You each have experiences and skills that I will need you to use for this task. You have relationships that I will ask you to renew. But I do not ask these things of you because of your skills. I ask because you are my servants. Oniggins stepped forward and bowed deeply. At your service, your majesty. Go to the southwest, where you have often taken the silk merchants, and carry my message. Yes, your majesty. Oniggins stood erect and walked out of the room. Moggins. At your service, your majesty. Go west. Carry my message. Yes, your majesty. Moggins did not look to the left or right as he strode from the courtroom. Allison, come here. Coggins. At your service, your majesty. I had to change the voice there quickly. Go to the region of Alinar, carrying my message to all who live there. Yes, your majesty. Coggins carried himself like a soldier from the courtroom. Figgins. At your service, your majesty. Take my words to the north, to the place where my enemy once established himself against me, and carry my message to everyone you meet. Yes, your majesty. Figgins squared his shoulders and took a deep breath as he turned to leave the courtroom. Sasha. At your service, your majesty. There are people in this great city and the surrounding region who have still not heard my message. Take it from door to door, telling everyone you meet. Yes, your majesty. Sasha swept from the room with a smile upon her face. Smuggins. With a surge of pride at hearing the name called, Smuggins limped forward. At your service, your majesty, he said, knowing the direction he would hear. Go to the south, to the people who once rejected you when you brought my message, and call them to follow me once more. He took a deep breath. Yes, your majesty. Smuggins walked from the courtroom, leaning on his cane. He heard the king speak once more behind him. Misha. This king's voice gained a note of tenderness. At your service, your majesty. Oh, my faithful little one, the king spoke gently. Take my message east, to the region where your friend the fool has worked in my name, and join him in his work there. Yes, your majesty. And Smuggins heard Misha's footsteps following him from the courtroom. He paused to rest in the great foyer of the palace before going to get a small carriage to take him to the land of the south, and waited for Misha to join him. She did so only a few seconds later. You go east, Smuggins said. It is a dangerous region. But my friend is there before me, said Misha. And when I speak, it will not be my words. I take the appeal of the king. Isn't it nice to know that we don't have to dress it up in any way? Smuggins asked. He is the king. And you, to the south? Misha was asking what he thought of his assignment. It isn't about me this time. It's all about him. Misha smiled. She reached out and squeezed Smuggins' hand. I'm glad you see that. They walked together to the stables, where the messengers were all being equipped with transportation for their journeys. Smuggins was given a small carriage to ride in, with a driver and a pair of horses that would change out at the first royal post house. The journey to the south was uneventful. When Smuggins arrived this time, he was not in disguise. Instead, he wore the livery of the king's messengers and went about with a guard from his governor's palace surrounding him. He went throughout the region, speaking the king's message of reconciliation, sharing it with peasant women working in the fields and with merchants at the city gates. One by one, people who heard gave their allegiance to the king, accepting the offered forgiveness. Those who refused to accept the king's sovereignty quietly packed their things and left the kingdom on the next available caravan. It took weeks, but Smuggins made sure that everyone heard the king's message. Finally, the day came for Smuggins to go to the gold mines and speak to the workers there, among whom were the leaders of the enemy's former resistance movement. With trepidation, Smuggins entered the mine, recalling the painful beating he'd received on his last visit. He took a deep breath and remembered Misha's words. I take the appeal of the king. Smuggins sat in a great cavern, across a table from the leader of the resistance. The man glowered at him. Smuggins cleared his throat. The man shifted in his chair. Smuggins opened his mouth to speak. The man blinked. The king has sent me as his ambassador, Smuggins began. I am here to speak his words to you. The leader of the resistance scoffed. What could the king have to say to me? He offers forgiveness, said Smuggins. He wants you to come back to him. He wants you to be reconciled to himself. The man's eyebrows rose and his eyes widened. Smuggins saw the change in the man's expression. Smuggins paused for a moment before speaking again. Do you know how many times I've failed the king? He asked. You, the man said, failed him? I've doubted, I've allowed others to speak against him, I've questioned his authority, and I came here on this task and messed it up entirely. I ran away in failure. The leader of the resistance sat quietly listening. And over again he has forgiven me, and he continues to entrust me with his messages. He has made me who I am through his gracious love. He has never once counted my failures against me. On the contrary, he has taken them to his own account. So I am his ambassador. I cannot be anything else. The fear had melted away. Any doubt Smuggins had about his task was gone. He stood, his weak leg aching dully, and leaned across the table, raising his voice in excitement. Oh, sir, I wish you could know him as I do. Accept his forgiveness. Be reconciled to your king. Smuggins's voice echoed back from the walls in the sudden silence that followed his entreaty. The leader of the resistance was perfectly still. As the echo faded, he took a deep breath. He was silent as though still listening. He breathed again. His expression had changed entirely. In place of the glower and hard eyes was a quiet, longing. He would take me back? Smuggins smiled. He wants you back. A few days later, Smuggins entered the king's courtroom, not leaning on his cane, but instead using the arm of the man beside him to keep his balance as he straightened his healing leg. Together they went up to the throne and stood before the king. He rose from his throne and stepped down to look the man next to Smuggins in the eye. Hello, said the king. Your messenger said you would forgive me. The man's eyes were full of pleading hope. The king looked to Smuggins and smiled. He looked back at the man and held out a hand. Well done, my ambassador. He spoke with his eyes fixed upon the man before him, but Smuggins knew the words were meant for him. You spoke my very words. Smuggins pleading with this man. And that's the end of the reading for Chapter 9. Tune in tomorrow for the final chapter, Chapter 10, The King's Land. I hope you've enjoyed listening so far by The King's Messenger by Carolyn Clare Gibbons. This book is a very good book about this character Smuggins and the king and what it means to us. There's themes of forgiveness and justice and what to do when people do bad things and how to forgive people. And it's full of just a lot of good teaching. So I hope that you've enjoyed listening to it, and I hope that you might consider purchasing a copy for your own safekeeping on Kindle or paperback. Thank you, and I hope to see you all again as soon as we can. Good night.